reach each other. Bo says he remembers one night being on top of a mountain.
Looking up at the sky, I remember, and I'd seen like 6 drones like moving across the sky. And you know, it's just really, it's not a nice feeling. You're so close and yet things are so stacked against you that it's just, you know, it's impossible, but you know, you can't do anything but just keep going.
Sometimes he'd think about what he'd do if a friendly convoy or a patrol came by, how he'd safely get their attention. If he ran at them in his Afghan clothes, they might think he was a suicide bomber. So he figured he'd take all his clothes off. Because a tall, skinny, naked white guy coming at you, something to pause over perhaps. If anyone had come across Bo, they'd probably be thinking the following. He's in pain on his left side. He's in gastric distress. He's starving, he's scared, and he's lost.
Did you ever think that during the course of the escape that maybe you made a mistake, that the escape is maybe more treasure and stuff like that?
No, I knew it was like before I escaped, I knew it was going to be more, there's going to be more immediate risk. You know, in order to get myself out the window, I had to basically come to terms with the fact that this was very much like a suicide mission. You know, it was like one way out, and I was looking for a needle in a haystack as far as being saved, as far as finding some safe points. But it was like, okay, if I'm going to die either from exposure out there or being shot while I escape, it's better than having my head cut off, because I saw enough of those movies, the videos, I saw enough of those to, you know what that would be like.
Toward the end, Bo was too debilitated to cover much ground. His hunger pangs were gone, but he was blacking out when he stood up, getting tunnel vision. He didn't exactly stop caring about getting caught, more like he stopped having the energy to be afraid. He remembers one of the last nights, watching the sun go down, and his only thought was that it was beautiful. On the last day, Bo says he had passed out on top of a mountain. And when he came to, he started trying to make some sort of brace out of sticks for his left knee. And he heard voices and rustling bushes. And below him, he saw the search party coming up the mountain. He was caught. Because of the drones, the men wanted to get him off the mountain as quickly as they could. They took him back to the prison. One of the older guys, Bo thinks he might have been a relative of Mul Sangin, attacked him, tried to rip his hair out, his beard out, which Bo says he mostly succeeded in doing. But Bo says he was so out of it, he didn't really feel it. He wasn't eaten more than that, he says, maybe because they knew, looking at him, he might not survive a beating. They threw Bo in a room, let him sleep. The next morning, they cleaned him up and they took him to a meeting with Mul Sangin, whose principal message to Bo was, if you try to escape again, we'll just kill you.
Did you apologize to them?
No, I never apologized.
for trying to escape?
Yeah.
I probably did.
Yeah. And I think that escape was the last time I saw stars until the night Special Forces picked me up. Yeah. That was a long time.
About 4 years after. And while he's waiting, so many people will be trying to get Bo away from Sangin. All these huge military and diplomatic forces about to kick in. Just as the United States is realizing, we need to get out of this war. And then things get really interesting. We'll get into all of that when we come back with more episodes of Serial after the new year on January 7th.
January 7th.
Serial is produced by Julie Snyder, Dana Chivas, and me in partnership with Mark Lowell, Megan Ellison, Kiko Lindgren, Jessica Weisberg, Page One, and Annapurna Pictures. Ira Glass is our editorial advisor. Whitney Dangerfield is our digital editor. Research by Kevin Garnett. Fact-checking by Michelle Harris. Copy editing by Ani Hinalani. Our music is composed by Nick Thorburn, Fritz Myers, and Mark Phillips. The show is mixed by Kate Walensky. Kristen Taylor is our community editor. Other Serial staff: Seth Lind, Emily Condon, Elise Burke.
Support for Serial comes from Audible, a gateway to great storytelling. Listen to best-selling books, news, humor, and more with the free Audible app for your smartphone or tablet. Start with the free audiobook of your choice by visiting audible.com/serial. Audible, stories that surround you.
Previously on Serial.
You left his cell phone in the car with me when you called me.
Okay, now at this point, you know why he's leaving the car with you.
Yes,
And why is that?
because he said it was going to kill Eddie.
And I definitely understand that someone could look at this and say, oh man, he must be lying. It's so coincidental.
He told me to speak with Jay, and I was like, okay, because Jay wanted to say hi. So I said hi to Jay, and that's all I can really recall.
The uselessness of what we're trying to do by recreating something that doesn't fit. It's like trying to plot the coordinates of someone's dream or something.
You know, I've never been able to explain. And it is what it is. If someone believes me or not, I have no control over it.
This is a Global Tel Link prepaid call from
Adnan Sayed.
an inmate at a Maryland correctional facility.
From This American Life at WBC Chicago is Serial, one story told week by week. And this, episode 12, is the final episode of season 1 of this podcast. It's been a year since I first contacted Adnan, and I'm still talking to him regularly. I'm still asking him the basics. Still thinking, I don't know, that he'll remember something, or maybe he'll just get so frustrated with me that he'll crack. I still want to know what you were doing that afternoon. I want to know who had your phone. I want to know what you were doing that afternoon.
No, I don't remember anything more.
This is from Saturday night, this past Saturday. I mean, we're down to the wire again. Oh man.
So you don't really have, if you don't mind me asking, you don't really have no ending? Like it's just...
I mean, do I have an ending? Of course I have an ending. We're going to come to an ending today. Plus a smattering of new information, a review of old information cast under a different light, and an ending. In case you haven't noticed, my thoughts about Adnan's case, about who is lying and why, have not been fixed over the course of this story. Several times I have landed on a decision, I've made up my mind, and stayed there with relief. And then, inevitably, I learned something I didn't know before, and I'm upended. Sometimes the reversal takes a few weeks, sometimes it happens within hours. And what's been astonishing to me is how the back and forth hasn't let up after all of this time. Even into this very week, and I kid you not, into this very day that I'm writing this. Because I'm learning new information all the time. For instance, I talked to Don. 8 months ago, he told me he did not want to talk to me for the story, and then last week, he talked to me for this story. He didn't want me to use his voice or his last name, but he said I could use what he said. Spoiler here, Don does not appear to know what happened to Kay, or why it happened to her, or whether Adnan is guilty. But it was interesting to hear what he said he remembered about the day he disappeared, and about her, and about the trial. Here's what he told me. Don said Hay was at his house in a town north Baltimore City on the night of January 12th, the night he was shot. He says she wanted to spend the whole next day with him too. She wanted him to call Woodlawn High School and pretend to be some authority figure, tell the office Hay couldn't be in school that day. She wanted it to be an excused absence rather than just plain cooking. But he didn't. He says he thought she should go to school. And besides, he told her he had to work the next day at 9 a.m. It was supposed to be his day off from the lunch chapters at the Owensville Mall where they both worked. But Don said he'd arranged to fill in for a friend at the Victoria Hut Valley. Don said he and Hay had made plans to meet up later that night at the 13th, after her work shift ended at 10 p.m. When the cops recovered Hay's car, there was a note inside with Don's name on it. Hey cutie, sorry I couldn't stay. I have to go to a wrestling match at Randallstown High, but I promised to page you as soon as I get home, okay? Till then, take care and drive safely. Always, Hay. In a P.S. on the note, Hay mentions the TV interview that had been taped that guess as to what her plan was for that afternoon. When Hay went missing, Don was one of the first people the cops called. He says he knew immediately he'd be a suspect. He said, quote, "That was the first thought when they said she's missing. I said, well, okay, they're going to try to blame it on me because she was with me last night. I'm her new boyfriend. I'm obviously going to be one of the first suspects, Ian and not." He said he immediately made sure he knew where he was. Well, when someone calls you up and tells you you've seen this person, they went missing, they haven't been seen since school, you automatically retrace everything he did that day. Did I see them? Did I hear from them? Did they page me? Did they call me? Where was I at this time? What was I doing at that time? Yeah. Maybe you're all noting, as I did, that wasn't a non-sustained reaction to getting called by the cops like this. I'm tempted to make a judgment right here, but I'm going to pull a benefit of the doubt. Because Adnan was 17, he was stoned, he's a different person. But noted, right? Also note, however, there was one similarity in how they reacted to Hay's disappearance. You know how Adnan says he doesn't remember calling Hay after the 13th? Guess who else doesn't remember trying to call Hay after the 13th? Dawn. Like everyone else, he said he wondered whether maybe she'd gone to California. She told him her father lived there. He says it's not that he didn't think about what had happened or didn't worry. It's just that he didn't know what to do. Dawn's alibi was solid. His computer-generated time card said he'd arrived at work at 9:02 a.m. on the 13th, taken lunch from 1:10 to 1:42, clocked out at 6 p.m. But Dawn's manager at the Hunt Valley store was his mom, so that didn't look great. Don said he was anxious throughout the investigation. Quote, up until the day they arrested Adnan, I had no idea what was going on, he said. They never said, okay, you're cleared as a suspect. I was left hanging, and until they arrested him, I had no idea. I suspected they might try to say that we were in on it together. I didn't know Jay existed until I started listening to the podcast. Don had met Adnan once. According to Hay's diary, it was December 23rd. It was a snowy day, and she'd had a minor car accident on the way into work, and she'd called Adnan to come help her out. They were broken up by this time, but he came to the rescue. In the parking lot outside LensCrafters, Adnan and Don converged. Hay writes, quote, Don and Adnan took a look at my car and told me not to drive it, unanimously. Ah! Mommy is going to be so mad, but I swear it's not my fault. Quote. Don told the cops back then that he and Adnan had a perfectly nice conversation. At trial, he said, Adnan said something to him like, okay, well, I just want to make sure you were an okay guy. Don told me the same. Quote, he sat and talked, and just as everyone else described him, he was very polite, articulate, just really the typical what you would expect of the ex-boyfriend meeting the new boyfriend, sizing each other up. We joked. We spent a good 10-15 minutes talking after we checked out the car. At trial, for whatever reason, this episode is firmly time-stamped as having happened in January, after Hay and Don had started dating, though it's clear from the diary it was December 23rd. In any case, Don's testimony at both trials, he's the state's witness, is milquetoast. He just says, yeah, I met him, it was cordial. Which made me wonder why the state even called Don. And according to Don, prosecutor Kevin Urich might have been wondering the same thing. Don said, quote, when I testified, they pulled me in a back room, and let me tell you how fun that was to have the prosecutor afterwards yelling at me because I did not make Adnan sound creepy, he said. They wanted me to make him sound creepy. So creepy that I felt intimidated, which I did not. Adnan, he was very personable. He was funny. He was everything that I already said. He was somebody that I would have hung out with if I knew him in school. Don's memory is that Urich yelled at him after both the first and second trials. Oh, he was irate, Don said. When I say yelling, he was literally yelling about it at me. I ran this by Kevin Urich, but he said he was not authorized to talk about the case. Don says he loved Hay, and he still loves her. It's not something that goes away, he said. Even though they only officially dated for 13 days, he says she meant a lot to him. She was totally unshy, he said, confident. She pursued him, he said, for all of December. Whenever she saw him at work, he said she'd ask him when he was going to take her out. Constantly, she asked him. Followed him into the lunchroom on his break, pestered him. He was dating someone else at the time, but then that ended. And so on New Year's Eve, they made their first date for the next day. He fell for her pretty quickly, he says. Quote, you could not like this girl. She was aggressive, intelligent, assertive is a better word than aggressive. Generally nice person. Anything I've heard anybody say about her It's not like, oh, I don't want to talk bad about the dead. It's just being honest. It's hard for me to explain. If you didn't like her, you didn't like her because she was so likable. But then you couldn't even be annoyed by her because she wasn't annoying. She was charming. Don said Hay actually changed him, changed the way he thought about himself. He said he'd come off a couple of bad relationships, girls who had cheated on him. Quote, she basically in no uncertain terms told me to knock it off, he said. That I have worth. I don't remember the words she used. I can't paraphrase it at this point. But I am worth having self-esteem. That I should think that I am good enough. And I took it to heart, especially after I found out that she had died. Unquote.
I'm sorry that I'm so late in the game here, but I didn't even know that this existed until Friday.
Yeah, that's okay. No, that's okay. That's okay. Here's another guy I just heard from. And speaking to him, all of a sudden, I was hearing Jay's perspective. Or at least this guy's perspective of Jay's perspective.
He was scared. I mean, like, terrified.
This guy's name is Josh. He asked that I not use his last name. He said he worked with Jay at Southwest Video, porn store. Josh was 21 at the time. They weren't close friends, he said, but Josh would give Jay rides and they'd smoke weed together, hang out a little bit. Josh said that on the night Jay was first picked up by the cops, so late at night on February 27th into the morning of the 28th, Jay called him at home and asked him to come into the store because he didn't want to be alone there. He was that scared.
He was, frightened out of his mind, and not of the police. Like, they were the secondary fear. I mean, he was afraid of going to jail, but not like he was afraid of Adnan, I guess is how you say his name. I don't know. Adnan, that's it.
Josh says Jay actually never told him Adnan's name, but Josh has listened to the podcast, so he knows the name now, but back then he didn't. He says Jay told him he was afraid that people were after him, people connected to the murderer.
Across the street from the video store was a parking lot for the Amtrak commuter train, and the parking lot was usually empty in the evening. Well, that particular night there was a van in that parking lot, which I'm pretty positive had nobody in it, but Jay was afraid. I mean, he was almost in tears.
Yeah.
He didn't want to go outside. He didn't even want to look out the door because he really thought the van that was across the street was like people waiting to get him.
But the people you're talking about, is it only in retrospect that you're thinking it's like Adnan's people, or did he say that to you at the time?
He said it. He said it was I guess Adnan had threatened him.
Right, but you're saying you didn't know he ever came to the name of the person. I'm just trying to imagine, is it possible that it was somebody else entirely who he was afraid of?
Yeah, I guess it could have been. But, whoever he was afraid of is obviously the person that committed the crime.
Right, but so I'm saying, did he express to you at the time that this was a person with Pakistani relatives?
Yeah.
Oh, he did.
He definitely said that it was somebody, the guy was Middle Eastern.
Josh says Jay told him it was the ex-boyfriend who killed Hay. It was Josh's impression that Jay had called the cops himself that night because he told Josh the cops were coming to get him, and he seemed anxious that it was taking them so long to get there. Josh says Jay was pacing, checking his watch, and he kept asking him to look outside and see if the van was still there. At trial, Jay testifies that the cops showed up at the video store on their own, and he didn't know they were coming. In his taped interview with the police that same night, February 28th, Jay doesn't mention a white van or that he's terrified of Adnan's people. But he does tell the cops that he talked to Adnan either yesterday or the day before, and that Adnan was threatening him in a general way. Here's tape from that February 28th interview. Detective Ritz talks first.
When was the last conversation you had with Adnan?
I got interviewed yesterday and the day before.
And the most recent conversation you had with him, what was the content of that conversation?
I learned that you guys were looking for me, and
how did you learn that?
A lot of people told me, friends of mine told me that you guys were becoming questions. And so I went to him and I said, you know, what did you get me wrapped up in? And he just told me, calm down, everything will be okay.
Where did this conversation take place?
I believe it was in front of my house in his car.
Other than you saying, you know, what brought you to, why did you get me wrapped up in this? What did he say?
He just told me, ain't nothing gonna happen, they don't know shit, and just stay cool.
Is there anything else said during that conversation?
I like it.
He told me that he knew somebody. I mean, I used to be involved in a lot of illegal activity, and people on the west side, he told me that, the gist of what he told me was that he knew the west side hitman. So, I mean, it wasn't, I wouldn't call it threat, but he was letting me go.
In a roundabout way, what if you said something to the police that...
Yeah, because I told him, I mean, I was like, you know, if they come to me, I ain't gonna, you know, fuck around and, you know, I'm just gonna tell them Jay is, like, you know who I know. Okay.
Okay, so the West Side Hitman. It's so strange. I find Josh's version of Jay's fear so much more believable than Jay's version of Jay's fear. Which makes me wonder if it's all just in the delivery. When Jay first told Josh weeks before that he knew something about the missing girl who was all over the news, Josh says he didn't believe him.
I said something about, you know, like him not being really involved or whatever, you know, and then he's like, no, man, you don't understand. I helped bury the body. And it seemed like he was kind of bragging, and I mean, that's kind of the guy that Jay was. It's not that he bragged about stuff that he did. Sometimes he made up things that he didn't do. And so that's kind of what I thought he was doing. Now, like, why would you say that? Like, why would you tell somebody that you really don't know that well? And I guess that's kind of why I didn't believe him. If I had done it, I certainly wouldn't have told me.
Right.
You know, maybe like my best friend or something, but not somebody that you work with at a porn store.
The version of the crime that Josh says Jay eventually told him was pretty close to the version that Jay's friend Chris told me too. That Jay was out somewhere and that Adnan came to him and showed him the body and said something to the effect of, "You gotta help me." Josh says he can't remember where Jay said he was when this happened, but he is certain the words Best Buy were never attached to the story. Josh went to that Best Buy all the time, and he says he definitely would have remembered that. He said when he heard in the podcast that Chris had mentioned the pool hall thing, that sounded right to him, but he can't say for sure. Josh says he also had the impression, like Chris, that it had all gone down later in the day, not mid-afternoon. Josh says at first Jay seemed afraid the cops were going to figure out he was involved through fingerprints or DNA or something, but that as time went on he seemed more and more afraid of the guy who did it, that he was threatening Stephanie. It was, "You better keep your mouth shut or else." He says Jay told him the threats were getting more forceful. To Josh, Jay was so not the type to be involved in a murder. Maybe he tried to act tough, he said, but he wasn't. He said he himself had friends who got in serious fights or who'd been locked up for Grand Theft Auto. But Jay was not in that category at all, he said. He was a nice guy.
He just wasn't, he wasn't the type of guy that you really got the sense he could do something real. He wasn't a killer, and he wasn't a thug. If anything, he was kind of the opposite. Like, he seemed like he was in way over his head.
Yeah.
I don't know, I remember feeling bad for him.
And was there any point, I mean, I don't think you sound judgy or something, but like, was there any point where you're like, well, you should go tell the cops then? You know he did this. Go tell the cops.
No, not really. I know that's probably what I should have said, but I didn't really believe him. And like I said, when it comes to like reputation, you know, on the street, you don't want to be the guy that's like, "Oh, go snitch." You know, you don't want anybody to see you're weak and all that stuff. And so I didn't ever say go to the cops. I mean, that would be like the bitch thing to do.
Josh says what never quite made sense to him, what he never entirely understood, was why Jay would help Adnan marry Kay.
Even if I didn't call the cops, it definitely wouldn't, grab a shovel and help him dig a grave.
No, that's what's hard about the story. There's something that's not computing here.
Yeah, no, it definitely never sounded right, which is why I never believed it until the cops actually did.
Josh says he only remembers seeing Jay one more time after that. He thinks maybe Jay came by the store to pick up his check. And when Josh asked him, so what happened? Josh says Jay told him he couldn't talk about it. In preparation for this episode, Julie and Dana, producers of this show, went back over everything we had. All the police files, the attorney files, the interviews I've done, the cell records. They did all the final sweep just to be sure we weighed everything. And because old details would have startling new meaning after a year's worth of research is behind us. They came across a couple of things they wanted to know. First and foremost, the Nisha call. I'd asked them, is there any other viable explanation for the Nisha call on a non-cell record? Here's Julie.
We had always been under the impression the Nisha call was a no way around it call.
It looks terrible.
It looks terrible. And it's 2 minutes and 22 seconds.
To remind you, the Nisha call is the one that happened at 3:32 p.m. on January 13th. This is that girl Adnan had been flirting with who lived near Silver Spring. And the Nisha call is the one that's always stuck out to me and I think to most people who have looked at Adnan's case closely. Because it happens on the afternoon that Hay disappeared, at a time when Adnan has said, insisted even, that he was not with his phone, that Jay had his phone while he was in school. Jay had told the detectives that Adnan had called some girl in Silver Spring that afternoon and briefly put Jay on the phone with her. And that's why the call is so important. Not only does it put Adnan together with his phone in the middle of the afternoon, it puts Adnan together with Jay in the middle of the afternoon. It corroborates Jay's story. I've always had some suspicion.
This has been a fun drive. Oh. Back and forth in the rain. There's no internet at work. Here, this guy's blocking my view. Look at the amazing gutters in LA. And the amazing drivers. That Mercedes was way over his line. Not that I didn't take that corner faster than I should have, but we all know that I'm a dickhead.